It's going to keep us on our toes.
Well, let's start off with some introductions. We'd love for all of you to just introduce yourself and a little bit about your business.
Carl Architura.
Carl Architura. Sorry about that. I'm Carl Architura. I'm currently Vice President and General Manager at PharmaRx Therapeutics. We're working on treatment-resistant depression therapy. It is a very small company, emergent. If anybody in the audience has $10 to $15 million that they'd like to put to work on treatment-resistant depression, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards.
How much?
Barring that, I also work, I've been working over the last 15 years in small pharma, emergent pharma, and more recently I've been focusing on rare disease products. So I'd be happy to kind of come at this topic from the challenge of small and emerging, but then small and emerging rare disease products, which generally have very small volume and lot sizes, but high pressure from patient advocates and timelines to market.
I think I got the mic on. Good afternoon, my name is Mike Orlowski. I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain and Technical Operations for Daiichi Sankyo. Daiichi Sankyo is a global pharmaceutical company headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. And I've worked for Daiichi Sankyo for about 7 years. In total, I have a little over 25 years of supply chain experience in pharma, as well as a few extra years on top of that in other industries. So we make primary care products, we make some rare disease products, we're moving to specialty, specifically oncology products. So I think what I can share with you is that our North American operations, which I lead, is 100% dependent on either sister companies or CMOs for everything. So our team is used to having everything within a CMO framework and the challenges that that presents.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Luiz Barberini. I work for Bayer. I've been working with logistics, supply chain, and procurement for the last 25 years or so. Most recently, I've been working with external manufacturing organization for Bayer in consumer health division. I'm based in São Paulo, in Brazil. Long flight, right? Expect to be back home. But I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here.
So I thought we would start off just talking about, we've been talking about the portfolio evolutions over the last 2 days here, moving more to specialized medicines, specialty products and personalized medicine. And we'd love to hear from you about what your external manufacturing should look like within a mix of small molecule, biologics, and specialty.
Sure, I can start with that. So Daiichi Sankyo right now is right in the throes of that. We just launched in the last 60 days an ultra-rare orphan medication, and where we're going to counting patients, right? How many patients did we get product today? So managing those types of products can be stressful because each patient is measured, and Daiichi Sankyo manages the delivery of the medicine to the pharmacy, and then the pharmacist mails it to the patient. So when you're dealing with products like that, the focus on individual patients really changes. So you have medical affairs. That's one big change that you'll see, is that your medical affairs or your clinical people are much more involved as compared to a hypertension product where you do these massive launches and you've got product your job as a supply chain person is really to make sure that the product is available either in the pharmacy or at least in the wholesaler. It shifts now to not knowing the patient's name, obviously for HIPAA, but knowing the patient is expecting drug, and you've got your medical affairs involved. So that's one big difference.
Well, in regards of small molecules, Bayer is still looking for its own internal capacities, as well as some provider that can help us. In fact, we don't have our new products fully developed and fully established in order to go to external manufacturing with full capacity. So we keep looking for that as a potential goal for the future.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be working primarily in the small molecule field for my career. I think as we look at rare diseases, there are going to be increasing focus on biologics, but every rare disease company is almost inherently going to be looking for good partners for that manufacturing.
And I think another bigger thing that we're seeing is more of another shift of M&A, and seeing more deals and acquisitions and consolidations on the rise. So, to Mike or Carl, I'd love to hear from both of you about some of the challenges that you've experienced with external manufacturing resulting from M&A.
Yeah, so this is the challenge that I think many people in this audience are facing, which is we inherit legacy products. I like to use that nasty word, legacy. So in this case, inheriting a legacy on a product at whatever stage, and we get them at various stages of readiness for market. So we may be inheriting a legacy product from a manufacturer that we wouldn't otherwise be comfortable with, but we want to acquire that product. So we acquire that product, then we've got to bring that external manufacturer up to the level that we expect, and that can be extremely challenging. The other thing that happens within that model is the external manufacturers are often changing themselves. They're being acquired, or private equity comes in. So I'm working with one CMO right now. Private equity came in, took over, and is establishing a more professional presence and quality structure within the organization, but it's big time change. And so we're caught in the middle of a tech transfer project with a team that's being disrupted. 45 people got taken out. 22 new people are hired. So our team is a crazy mix of new and old. So the merger aspect, the M&A aspect kind of works in both directions. But I think the biggest challenge we always have is to inherit a legacy product when we do that M&A, and then trying to reestablish the partnership with that manufacturer to the standards that we expect. Because I see a lot of products out there, they do a lot of due diligence work, and a lot of these products are substandard, or they may be very immature. So we were talking about rare diseases earlier. The rare disease products generally don't have a lot of buy-in. There's not a good body of knowledge, there's not a good body of data on which to rely with that manufacturer. So it's the environment is extremely challenging.
Thank you. Daiichi Sankyo's experience with M&A is more focused on acquiring products that are still in development, right? And Daiichi Sankyo is making a bet on whether this product will be successful in treating patients. So what we have found out over time, and maybe more from trial and error than from theory, so I can share something with you, and I've had this confirmed by at dinners with some of the CMO leadership, is that when a company is developing a product and their intent is to hopefully find a pharmaceutical company to buy it, that the manufacturing processes aren't very robust. It's really about getting to the sale and not to the market. And so in an M&A situation where you're really working with clinical developing companies, I don't think you can avoid it. I think you just need to be prepared for it, that you're going to have to work harder and really verify after the deal. You're not going to be able to figure it out all during due diligence either. Figure out after the deal that the products that you acquired will likely need more work than if you had started the development process yourself. On the other side, to Carl's point, there's also a lot of M&A on the CMO side, and we have seen that. And that's just one more unknown or variable that's in CMO management. So you're already managing your own team. Your own team has turnover, either intentional to provide development opportunities or because people leave. So you're replacing the person who's really working with that CMO. The CMO already has changes in who they have working on your team, right? So the communication is different. M&A just adds one more because that typically causes big changes in the acquired CMO. So the best thing I can say there is you you have to have relationships established constantly, not just up front, not just when things go wrong, but you really have to work with them on an ongoing basis because the timing of these M&As, you may not know them until a little bit.
I can take them from here. You mentioned relationship, and I was very happy to be present during the process where Bayer bought the MSD Consumer Health Division. I used to work for MSD, and now I'm working for Bayer. So I was present when we went through this process, and the main word or situation, the main point that I like to mention is the uncertainty scenario that you go through. Right? Your CMO doesn't know what's about to happen. They have no experience, or in our case, some of them they had no experience with Bayer. They didn't know what we were about to do. Some of them just said, okay, are you cutting me out of the business? What's going to happen? And from the other side, Bayer didn't know those CMOs. So we have a lot of uncertainties on both sides. We could only rely on the correct relationship on both parts to keep business going on. And so we did. It's been 4 years since we have this last merge or acquisition, I would say. Business is going very good. We could manage our CMOs in such a way that now they rely on Bayer, they trust us. Bayer has the same aspect, relying and trusting in our CMOs, right? And we are trying to improve our business together. So during a situation like this, M&A or future scenarios that we've been discussing here these days, I think that we must keep calm. Know that uncertainties are regular, they will happen for sure, but please rely on your relationship and try to improve your relationship with your peers and with the companies that you work with. Right?
One thing that we talked about also, which I think is a really interesting point, is when you have different quality expectations across these relationships. So I'm wondering if you can all sort of comment a bit on how you're getting more alignment when you have different quality expectations, when you have different CMOs that are consolidating, or even when you're acquiring or merging.
Well, okay.
Actually, I wanted to pick up on what Luiz said earlier, which is I have a new flag I want to create. Stay calm and supply chain on.
And relationship on, that's good one. I'll have this one. Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about quality, because from our perspective, we base our business, our CMO business in 3 points: compliance, quality, and cost. I have discussed this yesterday during one of our tables, but compliance is fully unnegotiable. I'm sorry, my English, my Portuguese and English mixed. It's okay. So thank you so much. So it's unnegotiable. I can't admit any fail on compliance, right? Quality is something that I can negotiate some topics, right? And cost is fully negotiable. I can discuss cost at any time. And quality is in the midterm, right? Meaning I need to ask for the right quality, the right quality. We've seen yesterday morning the concept related to value. What brings value to you, right? So quality is something that really brings value to us, and we must guarantee that it's correct. We can have some time to adapt our CMOs, adapt our process to meet the quality that we need, right? But of course, knowing what's about to happen and keeping our suppliers in such a level of quality that keeps us on the business without compromising the compliance mode. Right? So I think quality is the path that we need to go instead of only one point to mention.
That's a very good point there, especially with compliance. I think one important thing to remember with quality or cost or reliability rows is before you go to your CMO, you need to make sure your own house is in the same boat. I mean, and the message is the same, right? I think often you get into tough spots when you've communicated to a CMO some level of service for any of those things. And then you find out that within your own organization, you don't have a consistent message or approach. So I would say before you go out to your CMO with a quality, make sure you're aligned with your quality organization. It should be straightforward, right? Once established, you continue that relationship internally, but it should be straightforward. But if you don't get that first, you can run into trouble. So that's one message. The second one is we rely on our quality agreement, and it is flexible. That meaning in the negotiation it is flexible. But we lay out our quality agreement, and we strive and are pretty successful at getting the quality agreement signed at the same time as the supply agreement, so that it's not left as a hope we get it done at the end. And we have master services agreements if we're in development and there's still not things like costs that are finalized. You know, we understand that our CMO, until they get through validation, may not even know what the real cost is, and we want them to stay in business. So it's not about, so we have a lot of room for negotiation. So I would say, make sure you understand what your company's position is on an issue like quality, and then just make sure it's in your agreement, whatever that is, and be open to negotiating topics which are negotiable.
Just one moment. How many of you do really think that your company is much, much better than your CMOs? This is your point. This is the point, right? Sometimes your CMO is much better than you, but they don't have the maturity, or they don't have all the resources that we do. Can you imagine the resources that Bayer has to apply in a CMO? It's huge, right? They don't, but they have the capability. They have the speed. They can do something very much quicker than us. And if you really trust that your company is much, much better than your CMO, you have a problem.
Yes, I'm usually working in the virtual space where my company doesn't have the resources. Has to depend almost fully on the external quality system of the manufacturer, the CMO. So for me, I totally agree with Mike. It is all about getting the right agreements negotiated up front. And I say negotiated because it really should be a very active discussion around the MSA and the quality agreement. I try to bring the quality people kicking and screaming to the table to understand that the elements of the manufacturing services agreement are very important, and there's always quality elements in there. The quality people like to think of it as it's a separate item, quality agreement. To me, it goes totally together with the MSA. Having said that, you want the quality agreement as a standalone that an FDA inspector can look at, because that's the other issue, is in an FDA inspection, I've seen CMOs who don't have their quality agreements lined up. All this time, I mean, we're talking years after the FDA guidance was issued that said, the one thing you gotta do is you have to have a quality agreement in place. You still have CMOs out there in the marginal CMOs. The larger CMOs, oftentimes you're having a tough discussion with them because they don't want to modify their quality agreement at all, because they've got their template and they've got 50 clients. So it's always going to be a negotiation. But I believe when you have that quality discussion, you're really having a business discussion, and that's why the MSA goes so well together.
And I wonder also if you can talk about some of the latest operating models that you're using to manage the quality of CMOs beyond the
QBRs for, as a starting point, right? So quality should always be part of that QBR process. How many of you have QBR processes? Good. Okay. You may have modifications of that, but it's also a way to move from the negotiated structure of an MSA and a quality agreement into regular reviews, business reviews, quality business reviews that incorporate the quality discussion in there. So, did I say quality business reviews? I meant quarterly. So we take the quarterly business reviews, make those a vehicle for the manufacturing and the quality people to be engaged in how they're performing for us as a CMO.
Yeah, we have, in addition to QBRs, we integrate our quality folks into our S&OP process, both with our marketing, our brand teams, as well as with our CMOs, and we have found that to be very beneficial. We also have KPIs that the quality team has set up to help measure the CMOs. An example would be right first time. So how many times has a batch record come through for review and approval without having to get kicked back for a redo? And the time it takes from receipt of the first batch record to the final batch record, which we hope is 0, right? But sometimes it can be delayed 1 or 2 weeks just because of some misunderstanding or something's not clear. But it requires, what does that require? It requires that your quality team, all the members of the quality team understand those standards and don't apply them differently, because a different quality person may be reviewing a batch record from one batch to the next because of vacations or holidays or travel or, again, professional development and people changing roles. Even when that happens, you still need to have the same review or you're going to cause delays in your supply chain. So that's a couple of examples.
At Bayer, we have our external manufacturing leadership team, meaning operations, myself, supply chain, procurement, technical area, and quality. So we sit together. I would say that most of my time is talking with those guys from different teams and different countries to set how things are going with our CMOs. And almost weekly, in the same way, we have someone of these teams talking with our CMOs. So we have a very close contact between quality teams to discuss right first time, and actually how many times the right first time affects the supply chain. No, you don't have all the data integrity in your batch records that really affects some product to be released. So this is kept weekly. So we are always discussing some things like that. If something pops up, like we need to review our quality agreement, okay, let's put on the parking lot and check for that as soon as possible. Right? But we don't wait too much to keep these discussions flowing.
And I wanted to also just talk about some examples. Would love for each of you to just share an example of something that you've done that's helped to optimize, to collaborate with the CMO to optimize processes a bit more.
Well, I'm here today just to share the things that we've learned here with my CMOs. We have, I have other colleagues from Bayer here, right? But one of the main tasks that brings me here, that add values to me, right, is to bring some intelligence to my CMOs. They can afford to come here. They can spend 2 days and come from Brazil or from Colombia to US to such a discussion. So part of my job is to bring this information to those guys. And I was having some discussions on the booth with some suppliers saying, okay, this will not work for Bayer, but we work for one of my CMOs that's in Mexico or Argentina. So I have to put them in contact. And this is one of the part of our mission.
I can share one example. It's recent. It's happened in the last 12 months or so. It's still a work in process, but it's already started to pay some dividends for our company. So I mentioned before we are a global company headquartered in Tokyo. And if you work for a global company, you know that the way product is purchased is sometimes driven by finances or taxes or other things like that. So with that as kind of a background, Daiichi Sankyo used to manage its global product CMOs, so CMOs that support global products globally from Tokyo. And the relationships just weren't strong enough to really manage the CMOs effectively. But you can't change the financial or tax aspects of how the business wants to run. But we did implement we now manage our CMOs regionally for local products. So in North America, not only do we manage our local products, because we have products that are just specific to North America, but now we manage the CMOs that support global products that happen to be based in North America. So while the agreement is still with our Tokyo headquarters, and actually the POs still get cut by our Tokyo headquarters, the day-to-day relationship management is managed locally. And I can share with you there was a critical incident just 2 weeks ago at one of our CMOs for a global product. And we had still had the old model. It might have taken a week or so just to figure out what happened. But because we made this shift, I spoke to the president of the company the next morning. We learned at 6 o'clock in the evening that there had been this critical incident. He and I were on a phone call before 10 o'clock the next morning. I was able to get a much more candid update on what happened, a candid update on what they were doing, and a candid update on the prognosis. Which we may still not have 2 weeks later if we hadn't changed the model. So I can tell you that going on to a separate recommendation, we're still going to watch this critical incident until we get our next delivery. We're just not taking it at face value that everything will be back on track. But having that switch has really, I can just share with you, it's made our lives easier in the US as the biggest market. It's made our global colleagues' jobs easier because they knew that they had somebody in the US managing it.
I'm going to use a hybrid example, but it goes back to that issue of inheriting a product and a process and a CMO to execute that process. And I, like Mike, have had the experience of working with Japanese companies and that challenge of management. So I often become the US or North American contact for a lot of these CMOs. But I'll give you a case, that legacy issue we talked about. You get a compound that's in phase 2 or phase 3, but now you're thinking about a tech transfer because you want to move into the CMO that you prefer. So one of the challenges is you're working with CMOs, and they all have a different level of discipline around their SOP process. But even their tech transfer approaches will differ significantly. And we would have a certain philosophy from a regulatory standpoint of what we expect to put into an NDA file. So that becomes a quite rigorous debate around many technical issues. So one of the examples of best practices to actually help them reauthor some of those procedures, help them write some of those protocols. So, and that creates a level of teamwork and understanding early in that process before they go into process validation and start doing things that you're uncomfortable with. So, I would say there are going to be many times where you're going to have to intercede to the point of even writing protocols, or jointly writing protocols.
Luiz, I wanted to ask, we had spoken also a little bit about having someone internally within your organization located within your CMO, so wanted to hear from you about when would you need to be in that sort of a situation?
When you're facing a crisis situation, right? So this is mandatory. Or when you're starting up with a new CMO, so it always helps to have something like that. Once I started with a new third-party logistics operator, and I stood there 4 days a week. I was over there to letting them know what I think is important, or not to teach them. They knew what to do, but what is important for me. So in a situation like this, it's better to be very close to your partners. Right?
I wanted to break for questions. This is really the only topic that we have that's going to be focused on external manufacturing. Lena, over here.
Yes.
So the supplement to what Luis just said, I would say, spend time at the CMO and take people to dinner. And sort of insist, there's sometimes you don't want to overpower and try to make these people feel like you're just overrunning them, but take people to dinner, take people to lunch, have a conversation outside of the technical sit down in the conference room.
Does anyone have a question? If anyone does, just raise your hand. Okay.
Jonathan Ross, Rerouted Pharmaceutical. So my question, just in terms of, in the context of external manufacturing, I just want to get a little bit of appreciation of kind of best practices when you talk about production planning in that environment, because as you well know, if you're dealing with external manufacturers, you don't have control over, certain aspects of manufacturing. So, everything from dealing with the manufacturing, when there was the hiccups and everything like that, what kind of advice could you give, an emerging company on, how that process needs to go, and maybe what you use to, kind of control that process, make it a little bit more predictable?
Wow.
Weekly contact. Then I'll drive that down to maybe daily contact. But I think in the case of tech transfer work, it would always be around a timeline, so you need to have a project manager assigned within the CMO organization who's going to drive it. Typically, the way the CMOs would work is once you're moving through validation, so validation's a project, but immediately following validation, there's usually a handoff from that project manager to an account manager, who would then manage the ongoing schedule. But to me, it's set up regular weekly calls, even if they're short, 30 minutes. If you need more, have some breakouts from that, but have a consistent weekly pattern where you're touching base with them to see what the schedule looks like in a tech transfer mode. And I think likewise in the ongoing commercial, once you're commercialized, you want to have that regular interaction. And hopefully they can give you either portal access to their ERP or some type of ongoing structure. I think the other thing we're going to have is in the world of serialization, we're going to have the opportunity to know that our product has been produced at the CMO, that it's been serialized, and we have a shipment notification packet that's been delivered to us, or through, if we're using TraceLink, for example, as our cloud solution, then we know in a way that we didn't know in the past. So we're actually, that serialization element is going to help us all.
John, that's a great question. I think it's the one you can spend 30 years studying. I think that as a startup company, I think you've got to figure out what's really important to you. Probably reliability is going to be pretty high up there, but it may not be. You may be cash constrained as well. But there are techniques that you can use. For example, you may say, I want this delivery in 3 months because that's what your PO says. But you have a discussion with them, and if planning is really an issue, you say, we'll take a delivery early. If you want to make it next month, we'll take it, which means you have to pay for it, of course, right? But so figure out when you're talking to them about planning, find out what's important to them. Some of them want to make and ship. Some of them want a campaign. I'm assuming that you've got a reliable supplier, meaning that they do what they say they're going to do, right? But that can be an issue, and that's a much more difficult one to solve.
Pass the bonus one. So I guess the other part is the level of involvement in with your CMOs into their capacity planning process or anything like that. Can you speak to that? I mean, is that realistic? I guess in the context of say,
every month we get a report from our CMOs, and it's specific to the line that we're using, right? Because CMOs have multiple lines, and we ask them to share what is our portion of their capacity and what is the remaining committed capacity. We don't ask them who it is, but we say so, and we're looking to see that, make sure that they're like in that 60 to 80% range is where we think is a good place for them to be. Too low, and you wonder if they're going to have a trained staff running the equipment. Too high, and you wonder if they have a hiccup, are they going to wind up bumping up over 100% for a short period of time, and then having to prioritize.
I would say that when you have an in-house production, what do you do when you want to learn more about your production schedule? You go to the shop floor, right? You have to do the same with your CMO. You go, pick up a car, and go drive to your CMO, or at least have a call or discussion. Okay? You must be close. You must be very close to them and learn how they work and how they do those things. Right? This is the one. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, Dan Morosco, Takeda. Been working with CMOs most of my career, so I'm currently external supply lead. I mean, I think the biggest, we talked about resources availability, either within the big pharma company or the pharma company or the CMO. I mean, we all talk about the CMOs being an extension of us, but yet they're always, the mentality still seems to be there's the us and them. I'm not saying they shouldn't be accountable, but if this was a plant site and you had an issue, an internal plant site, you would make sure you put all the resources on it to correct the problem. you know, I think the mentality needs to be that if the CMO fails, then we somehow failed. So, and Carl, I also agree with you. Take them out to lunch, take them out to dinner. If you can share patient stories with the CMOs, because to a lot of the people on the shop floor, they just think I'm just labeling vials all day, you know. And once they see that connection to the patient, I mean, it does, it shows that their job matters. So much.
Absolutely huge. I was working on a drug for cognitive impairment in schizophrenia and Alzheimer's. And we were meeting with the contract packager, and the woman who was our project manager had an elderly relative with Alzheimer's. Boom. It made a huge difference.
We can take one last question.
Oh, one last question, okay.
And rare diseases particularly, you want to tell that story.
Hi, Ken Allen from Merck. I'm curious how you're seeing agreements being structured to secure long-term capacity at CMOs, like in the 2 to 5 year range.
Well, okay, so we must discuss part of our strategic plan with them. We know that strategic plans are just plans, they can change, right? I was discussing something related to Coppertone, and the next week we just sold the Coppertone business to other company, right? So it happens. But if they do some kind of investment or they are compromising somehow with the volume, and they are preparing their capacity, you must be aware of that and be very close to them, saying, okay, I asked for that capacity, I'll honor my word and pay for you whatever is necessary for that. This is one point. The other one, you keep continue tracking on micromanagement in terms of how their production is going on, right? If they have a new customer, you must be aware of that. You have to share that capacity with someone else. So be aware. Okay.
I think when we set up the agreement, we try to go into it with, Luiz mentioned it, with expectations on both sides. So we build into the price, or we pay for the equipment if necessary up front, and we have dedicated, or we say we want first priority of the equipment. I think my experience has been that the challenges are when the unexpected happens. You sell the Coppertone line, or forecast doubles, or you decide to supply other markets. And in that case, the agreement really needs to be structured so that both parties perform in each other's best interest at that time. So it takes a little bit of art and experience to write those agreements, but you always want your CMO to act in your best interest when the unexpected happens. And my experience has been that they typically just want to get paid for the work they do and make a fair margin on that. That's usually that's really all they want. And they want to be thanked, and they want, everything else is gravy. So that's my, if we work to the plan, then it's built into the plan. But if it's not in the plan, the deal has to be structured in a way that allows both sides to work in each other's best interests.
Yeah, in the small emergent and rare disease space, it's often, we're signing a mutual exclusivity. So we're giving them exclusivity, we're asking them for exclusivity. We're often buying dedicated equipment, and so we're locking in on that. But even with dedicated equipment, there's always going to be shared services, be it labor or facilities. Oftentimes for us, a modular approach works very well, where they can move equipment in and out of different modules, so we're not constrained on one location, one work center.